All right, guys, we're going to just give the mic here to Keith Bursack. He's going to give a quick introduction of who he is, why he was part of the game, or how he was part of the game. And, I've known Keith for a long time. Back when I was, 15 years old, he was the one telling me why missions were useful and why we should stop playing battles at our local store on the OP Rules Hotline. So he ran the first tournament that I ever attended, lent me my first Power Leech, so
Nice.
we go way back.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he's got some good information in his head for you guys.
Thanks, Bill. Again, my name is Keith Bursack. Really great to see such a good turnout here today. Looking forward to kind of sharing my experiences with OverPower and everything that happened. So basically, what happened, and forgive me if I'm a little bit off on some of the dates or some of the timing of everything. And in a similar vein, I'll apologize to anybody that plays me tomorrow. That I haven't really played for quite a while, so if I'm off on some of the rules or need a little help, I appreciate your help. And certainly not trying to get anything over on everybody, just kind of don't remember, or maybe everybody's worked some of the rules a little differently since then.
We'll chastise you accordingly. Don't worry.
No problem. So my entry into OverPower was started, I think the end of '94, the beginning of '95, right after Power Surge came out. I had recently separated from my first wife and was living in an apartment with two guys that I'd gone to high school with, and I went to a store called Legends at the Deptford Mall, which is a comic book and card store. And I played other games. I played Magic the Gathering. I don't know if it was around the same time, but I also played games like Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, Galactic Vampires, Legends of the Five Rings. And when going to the store, I met a tall gentleman named Gabe Alonzo, who tried to explain to me about the game and show me how it worked. And he seemed like a nice enough guy, and not from the area. You could tell he was had more of like a West Coast feel to him. He was from, I think, either California or Seattle area, but he was actually did some freelance work for Fleer for the OverPower card game. He would go around doing demonstrations, trying to get people involved in the game, and I happened to be somebody who got involved that day. So he and I spent a couple hours together just hanging out. He was teaching me the game, which obviously was very interesting. And then, as I was getting ready, I bought some of the product, and then as I was getting ready to leave, he told me about a tournament that was coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks at a hotel in Cherry Hill. And then he thought I should give it a shot and try to go. I'm like, sure, what the heck. So I bought a little bit more product, some more Power Surge. He recommended I buy more of the Power Surge and some of the other games. So then I went home, tried putting together a deck. I think the deck that I ended up coming up with was Banshee, Iceman, Jean Grey in Reserve, and Cyclops. So I go to this tournament at a hotel in Cherry Hill, and there were, I think, only 3 other people that showed up for it. There was a very nice, friendly Asian guy. Was probably maybe around 5'6", and had two younger, not that much younger, but 2 teenagers with him. A boy was probably about like 14 or 15, a girl who was like maybe 12 or 13. My first match, I ended up playing the boy. His name was Anthony Williams. And he had a good deck. It was a strength deck, but we ended up playing, and I ended up beating him. The second game, I ended up playing the Asian guy. His name was Frank Yu, and it was a very good game. He had more of a fighting deck, but he had a fighting deck, and it just totally destroyed him. The one hand when I played the Banshee, 1 per deck, we had to discard all the fighting cards of the fighting icon in your hand. I ventured very heavy and hit him with that, and that was really the game at that point. Even though it took 1 or 2 more rounds before it wrapped it up. And then I remember after that Frank was obviously a little bit upset at having lost, and so he talked to his daughter, which was his wife's. Those were his wife's children. I remember I couldn't hear, but he was talking to her, and I don't know, evidently trying to either coach her, or, trying to impress upon her how important it was to try to beat me in the final game. But we played the final game, and it was a good game, but I ended up beating her too. And got whatever the prizes were, went home, and it was probably maybe a month and a half later that I got for the OverPower Legion. This was the first issue had already come out. I don't know if anybody here got the OverPower Legion way back in the day when it came out. But this is, if you haven't seen it, this was the newsletter that came out every couple months or so. And then I opened it up. That was pretty neat. And then I looked on the back where they had the tournament news with the top 10 players, and they didn't have this in the first issue. And I was completely shocked to see my name was number 1. And then I ended up a couple weeks after that went to another tournament that I ended up winning. I think that one I actually played even though it seemed like it wouldn't have worked, I played a Defenders deck, which had Doctor Strange, the Hulk, and Namor, even though the power grids didn't line up at all. But I was a huge Defenders fan and wanted to play that team. But they didn't have any of the prize support there. And so they gave me the phone number for the people at Fleer to call them to try to work out getting the prize support. And what happened was, because where I lived was in Deptford, which is maybe like 15, 20 minutes south of where the Fleer offices were in Laurel. So I just said, hey, let me come in and pick this stuff up. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's fine. And it turned out that the reason I ended up being ranked number 1 was that the Asian gentleman I played, Frank Yu, he was the number 1 ranked player at the time. And both of his children were heavily into the game as well, and they were, I think, both top 10 players as well. So that's, to my surprise, I ended up being number one. He said, well, hey, you beat the guy that was number one, so you're going to be number one. And it ended up being a very good visit. I kind of hung out for a little while with Steve and Ron, and they were working on the monumental cards at the time. And one of the cards they were having a hard time coming up with the name for was the Thing Special. And it was the one where Thing has like he's standing there, and he's got like a kind of a mask or bucket on his head. And I remember the game effect was, I think, -2 to his attacks, but +2 to his defense for the remainder of battle. But they were kind of stuck on what to call it. So I said, and I just kind of popped in my hand. I said, Bucket O'Shane. And the two of them just thought that was like the most hysterical thing they'd ever heard. And they're like, oh, that's great, that's great. And, that ended up being the name that they called the card. But I guess it just, tickled Steve so much. He's like, hey, we've got this thing, the OverPower hotline. The guy that's running it, and I don't even remember whose name it was at that point. It seems like there's a lot of calls, and what would you think about maybe you and him splitting it? You'll do one day, he'll do another. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And at the time I was in law school, I had I think just lost the job I had maybe a month or two before that, so that ended up being a really great gig. I remember he gave me the passcodes to be able to get the voicemail, and at that point it was maybe like the messages were backed up like 4 to 6 weeks. And so I was writing the messages down, and I had like a legal pad, and I got like 2 or 3 pages of people's names and numbers, and it was still like barely even made a dent in how many messages there were. So I called Steve, and I'm like, hey, what do I do with this? Because there's so many messages. Do you want me to like take all of them down and then send him the ones from one day, and I'll take another? He's like, you know what? He's that far behind. He's out, and you'll just do the whole thing. I'm like, okay, that sounds great to me, because I ended up building a lot of freelance hours for making all those calls. But the good part about that was it let me get in contact with the grassroots OverPower player across the country. And I think that's I think Phil and I may have talked, and it's possible earlier on that if any of you ever called, that I may have called you back and you left you a message or talked to you. But it was just really nice being able to talk to people. I mean, a lot of people that called were also kids, not necessarily teenagers or adults, but a little bit younger that had rules questions or something like that. And it was just nice to be able to talk to them and kind of encourage people playing all over the country. And another thing that I got to do is represent Fleer at trade shows to help show OverPower to dealers, people that had stores in certain areas that would come. That ended up being a lot of fun. They flew me around a lot of different parts of the country. I'd sit there and just either do demonstrations or like give product away. And I remember that there was even one trade show that I went to. I think I was somewhere, I don't remember where. A lot of them tended to be in the Midwest. It may have been somewhere in Western Ohio that actually a friend of mine got to come with me because they expected it was going to be a pretty big show. And so that was pretty neat to bring a friend and say, hey, come on, they're going to fly out there. They're going to you're not going to really get much in the way of money, but it'll be a great time. And he and I just had a lot of fun with it. We kind of like almost came up like a little mini game show. People would come up and we'd let them spin the wheel and we'd ask them questions about. We'd ask him, okay, what area do you think you're an expert in? Because he and I were both really big comic book fans. So, we had a pretty big base of knowledge about comic book history. Like, hey, try to stump us with a question, or we'll try to stump you with one. And, if you stump us and we can't stump you, then you get the product or some prizes or something like that. But, it ended up being a lot of fun. Interestingly, part of the other thing I did aside from working the OverPower hotline was I was in charge of running, setting up tournaments around the country, providing prize support to comic book shops. I think doing a little bit of work with the OverPower Legion as far as the rating system to make sure that they were aware, what tournaments were sanctioned, which ones weren't, and looking for the results. I also got to, do prize support, which was a lot of fun. Let's see. Some of the, I guess, non-OverPower related things were at this point, comedy at that point in that time frame. Comedy Central came to Fleer because there was a new show that they had that was going to be coming out in about a year, 6 months to a year, and they wanted Fleer to consider doing a card set based upon this show. It's a little show you may have heard of called South Park. And so, being there, I got to see the original video that included both I don't know if anybody here is familiar with seeing any of this stuff, but the Spirit of Christmas video that they came up with, which is, I don't know, 4 to 8 minutes, as well as the first episode, the one involving like the aliens where they come and abduct Carbon. I don't know if anybody remember that episode, which was kind of interesting because we thought it was one of the most hysterical things we ever saw. I remember we were literally just about falling on the floor watching The Spirit of Christmas. Has anybody here seen that, or does anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah. It's just a really, without getting too much into it, it involves Jesus and Santa fighting, and obviously it was made by I guess Trey and Stone and Parker that had done that when they were in college. So the language was just like outrageously over the top. And they were, what these kids were saying, it was just hysterical. We just thought it was the best thing. But Fleer didn't think it was really that good an idea for a card set, so they passed on it. But I must have seen that video, those videos. It must have been 100 times because I was just showing everybody that I know, like, you got to see this. This is going to be great. And it was interesting because from seeing it so many times, I realized that when the episode that finally aired for the original episode, they actually had redubbed a couple of the female voices in the episode. I'm like, that's not the same voice. I heard it so many times. I was like, no, that's not quite the same voice. Or I don't know if it was a different actor, or they just dubbed it a little differently. But that was pretty interesting. There was I don't remember what year it was. But Fleer was doing trying to get an NBA card game off the ground, sort of not similar to OverPower, but it was a collectible card game. So they flew me and a couple other people out to Detroit for the All-Star game. We were talking about Detroit a little earlier. I didn't get to see the game, unfortunately, but it was pretty fun. It took place in the arena where they were having this, these demonstrations, as well as a whole bunch of other events going on. But this one particular area was for Fleer, where we were demonstrating the card game, and then just got to hang out with the people. Actually, I ended up flying out there with Dan Buckley, who back then Dan Buckley was. I'm not sure exactly what his title was. He was basically in charge of the OverPower division and some of the card games and collectible and non-collectible card games and other card sets for Fleer. And then it was Ron Perez and Steve Domzalski that worked for him. There was Kathy Probe, who did a lot of the internet work, and she would also go to tournaments and things like that as well. So that was also a lot of fun. I would say that probably the highlight for me and my career, they'll actually back up because I think this took place before that. But in '95. I had, along with a lot of other people, obviously, flew out to Chicago for the Nationals that year, and I ended up in the semifinal round. I played Aaron Schenke, who at that point I think was like 12 or 13 years old, and I believe my team, I can't remember, was the Marauders. I don't remember exactly everybody that was on. No, I don't think I did play X-Babies on that one, and I believe it was a battle site. Because I know that I had, I think I had Onslaught as well. And I remember the key for me in the deck was activating the Marauders Vertigo card to be able to shift the attacks to hit wherever I wanted, and then block the ones I did want. And then at some point having the what?
The KO.
Yeah, the one where basically Onslaught sacrifices somebody, KOs a character, and then every hit on that character, even if it's in current battle, doesn't count for the venture total. And so I was able to load Scarlet Witch up to where she got I KO'd her with 17 hits on her or something like that. But interesting, and as a parenthetical, I realized when they had they made me do some play testing because I really liked working with Steve and Ron, but neither of them played the game or came from a gaming background like I did, so they came up with stuff that was often interesting or kind of cool, but didn't necessarily take into account how it would affect the metagame. And originally they had the Vertigo card that you could play defensively, and at some point I had to bring to their attention, I'm like, well, this thing is just just out of control to be able to use it defensively. So to kind of neuter it a little bit, they made it so you could only play it offensively. Otherwise, it was just way too powerful to be able to affect where things go and have it do it as a defensive, not even need a card action for it. But so that was one of the things in the on my team. But so I remember most of the hand where the game with Aaron and I tipped, which was I think it was by the third round, and I got the basically my dream hand as far as okay, this is the one where everything's kind of coming together. Most of it, that's right. Another team that a character I had on the team was Hellfire Club. Because part of it involved the Tessa card where you could discard a card usable by her to then draw 4 cards and you can keep duplicates. And so I had that, and I had the web-headed hero, the web-headed wizard, figuring okay, if it doesn't work, then I can do it. And there was another really good card that I had, and I said the only way that this isn't going to work is if he has 2 negates. And so I ended up, I think, venturing 5 on that turn, giving him 3 cards, and I believe he discarded 1. And then through the course of the hand, he ended up having the second negate, so I ended up losing, and then losing the battle, which was really disappointing because in the sense that I'm going to kick myself, like, oh man, maybe I should only venture 4, not 5. But as like Phil and I were talking about earlier, sometimes when you're in a situation like that, because even though I previously been the number 1 ranked player, I think I actually here with the OverPower Legion 2, and then also with the second one, I was number 1 as well. But then after that, because I started doing so much work on the game, I just didn't really have the opportunity to go play in tournaments. So eventually, I think by the time the 4th one had come out, I had dropped off the top 10 because I just, the other guys were playing so many more games and getting so many more points that even though I had a relatively good score, whatever way they figured it out, I just ended up dropping off the top 10 and never really came back. So I was like, all right, well, let me try it at the Nationals. There was actually, Steve and Ron kind of had some discussion whether they felt that because I was doing so much work on the game, if I should really be allowed to play in the tournament. And eventually, I think it was Ron a little bit more felt not that I should be able to because at that point I'm still working on the game, but not as a full-time employee. It was only a freelancer, so he didn't really think that it was a conflict. But just when you're kind of in there and you're in that moment, I felt like this is the hand I really felt like it would be worth putting so much out there for. And I said, all right, what the heck? I mean, it's it's either getting the finals or not getting the finals, so you gotta sometimes either go big or go home. And I will say, I don't think is Marcel here?
No, not yet.
Not yet. I guess he and I have a different memory about how the consolation game turned out because he ended up losing his game versus Sherry Briggs. The finals ended up being 12 or 13-year-old Aaron Schenke playing, I don't know, mid-30-year-old Sherry Briggs, where he's a kid, she's a scientist. I mean, it was really great. It was great for Fleer because it was such a diverse, pool. It's like, hey, it's going to be great for us. It's either a kid or it's, a non-traditional card game person playing who's going to be the winner. And then I remember just being so angry that I lost that I saying, Marcel, before playing, man, I'm really angry, I'm taking it out on you. And to my memory, I thought that I beat him. I think he remembers it differently, but and it's funny because the reason I found that is I'm probably like most people bored one day at work, so I kind of let me Google my name and see what comes up. And at some point, like on the second or third screen, I saw something related to OverPower, and I'm like, oh, let me check this out. And the headline said "Confessions of an Overpowered God." I'm like, oh, this guy. I'm like, so I'm reading through, he's talking about his experience. And he's like, oh yeah, blah blah, and I won. I'm thinking, wait a second, that is not correct. I remember that game, and I don't know, memory kind of comes and goes, especially as you get a little older. But that's one thing that I remember very clearly is I think I was great, so I win third place, and I think the prize may have been like the some Hollow Heroes, and some other things. But at that point I was disappointed because I didn't get to play in the finals. But so I sent him an email saying, hey, I kind of remember this. And he's like, oh, do you have any proof? And I'm like, no, I don't have any proof, but I'm pretty sure. I'm like really sure. He's like, I kind of remember. I'm like, you're kind of sure, but I'm really sure. Because I remember the aftermath of feeling like, oh, I really want to take this out on somebody. And then after that, that was really about the last time that I ended up playing, at any kind of competitive level. I mean, it was great playing such good competition. I mean, one of the things that I always loved about OverPower was the camaraderie and how good everybody was to play with. From playing other games like Magic, and since then I played HeroClix. Just not quite the same. Some of the people tend to be a little bit more cutthroat, not quite as fraternal when it comes to everybody. So that was one of the things I always liked about that. Like for instance, we were talking, I think at the Chicago Nationals. I think that may be the first time that we did the U.S. versus Canada. Any sort of big tournament level. I don't remember who won that one, but I remember it was it was definitely some good gaming. But what happened the next year is they flew me out to California to run the regional tournament. And so what happened was, it was really pretty cool. I flying out to LA, they rented me the car, I'm driving down to, I think, Emmett or wherever it was to run the tournament. And I get in there Friday night and meet some of the guys at the store. But actually what happened after the fact was maybe 2-3 weeks later, Kathy Proberg did the internet stuff, sent Steve Dobzowski an email on May 27th, 1997 at 2:55 p.m. And the subject was Internet News on Hemet. And it says, Steve, the following is a post I pulled from the net regarding the Hemet event. Looks like a winner. Enjoy and please share with Keith. Kathy, and then she cut and pasted it from wherever she got it. Does anybody mind if I just read this? It's about a page and a half. It says, it was a 6-hour drive for me to get to Hemet, California for the regional tournament, but it was worth it. I had a lot of fun. I met some great people. I got a box of Monumental about a week ahead of schedule, and I came in 4th place. The night before, I showed up at Wes Lober's comic book store, All American Comics, to see if there were any games to be had. Were there ever? I got to see several excellent players, including the eventual tournament winner. It was great to finally be able to play against someone. Where I live, OverPower players are few and far between. Keith Bursack, who would be judging the tournament, was giving away DC promo cards to anyone who could beat him, but I didn't get to play him until the next day. He had some really neat concept decks, which played well too. Interestingly, about 20 boxes of Monumental arrived that day, and of course they were all sold. When I got there was one starter deck left, which I promptly bought. When Wes closed the store, he raffled off a box that someone didn't come in to get or something, and I lucked out. Wes could have auctioned it off probably for $100 or more, but he was a good guy and sold it for the regular price. The day of the tournament arrived. And actually, let me jump in with a little side story here. So that night, the Friday night, I believe it was, Jonathan Land, obviously he's still in the California, I believe, area. He and I went out to this Mexican restaurant, had some dinner, and we're kind of talking. And at the time, I wasn't really dating anybody or in a serious relationship. And so there was a couple, probably some 4 to 5 women from an office who probably came there after work. And so I don't know, be a little bit of eviction. I'm like, I told the waiter, I was like, hey, send them around on me. And it turns out when they came back, the bill was like $40. And I'm like, what the heck? Why is this so expensive? And I was like, oh, they each had like a shot and a beer. I'm like, well, wow, I thought they really took advantage of me. I was thinking it was going to be like one drink. I wasn't buying the whole table, 2 or 3 drinks. I think I got to dance with, maybe 1 or 2 of the women, but, so anyway, back to the letter. The day the tournament arrived, many people from out of town and who had not had a chance to acquire any Monumental cards. For this reason, Keith decided that cards from Monumental would not be allowed in the tournament since they were not officially released. There was some hooping and hollering, but I think it was the right call. Even though I would have had a big advantage with my Bastion any hero, I don't think it would have been right to use it on people who had no chance to have one. Overall, I think Keith did an excellent job running the tournament. Commenced 11th. That's what I said, I guess, before the starting every individual match. I was like, commenced 11th, and a lot of people there like that. As for the tourney, it was great. I was incredibly nervous facing all of this high-quality opposition. I lost my first game, then won 5 straight before losing to Aaron Blank. He didn't remember Aaron's last name, but I know it's Shanky. In one of the semifinals. And the other semifinal was defending national champ Sherry Briggs versus hometown favorite Brian, I believe it's Stangy or Stang. Brian won a long game in part due to a universe card. And then the final was even longer. Keith decided there would be no time limit on the final, and I think it was at least 40 minutes, and boy, it was tense. By the way, Aaron is 12 years old, I believe, and his accomplishment is remarkable. He had Brian reeling, but in the end, Brian came out on top. You should have heard the celebration. The Hemet players are a tight-knit group, and they wanted one of their own to win, and he did. Last year, after the San Diego Regional, I urged Sherry to kick some East Coast butt, which she did. This year, Brian, it might be up to you. Congratulations, and show them what we're made of. Oh yeah, the prizes were, it was Brian who won a trophy and a trip to nationals. Aaron, who won sets of Monumental, Justice League, IQ, and DC, which is a pretty good haul. Sherry won 2 boxes of Monumental, and Matt Fell, who's the one who wrote the letter and sent the email, won 1 box of Monumental. So that was certainly great to be able to get that kind of, attaboy from, somebody completely unsolicited. And it was, it was really fun running the tournament. I think I was just playing some side games or whatever, not obviously playing in the event while I was running it. But just, it was a lot of fun. But I think the high point for me, actually, before I get to that, some of the other things I did when I was at Fleer, where they would often have artists like sign things. They were like, for instance, like Joe Jusko, a famous artist. They would play a set of his cards, and he came to the office and signed like a stack of like 100 uncut sheets. I think I would have to go there in the area he was going to sign on. I had to rub it with something so that it would kind of get a little bit of the gloss of the ink, the Sharpie marker type stuff would stick. So I don't know. He's kind of an interesting guy. He used to be a New York City cop before getting into art. And Joe Quesada, who at some point was the editor-in-chief of Marvel. I'm not sure what his capacity is. I know it's still pretty high level. Working with him on some of the card sets and signing things. I got to write some articles for some magazines, for instance. And there's there'll be some copies for people to look at. Certainly to read the articles if you're interested. I wrote an article in this particular Scry magazine. This particular Scry magazine, and this one as well. There's this particular, it's like a flyer that Fleer said this was promoting the QFX set, and there's several articles in here, like promotional type things related to OverPower, uncredited, but I wrote all the OverPower articles in here. I know the way the size of your deck thing. Interestingly enough, there's something in here. There's a little preview for DC OverPower, and I guess I'm not sure why you even remember this, but there's something in here with the image OverPower, and there was a quote that I came up with from Grunge, which I don't know if anybody knows the character of Grunge from Gen 13. A bit of a dope. But so his quote is, wahoo. What was the question again? Just for whatever reason, the people just, at Marvel just really thought that was hysterical. So they were, they really liked that. So I got to write that. But for me, the highlight was in the Monumental set that Steve let me write all the event cards. And so what I had to do was he gave me a list of the artwork that would be associated with each particular event card. But then, everything else on there was up to me. So like, for instance, when it comes, and actually this is something that I had made, was so these are not all the event cards from there, but they, my sister's wife came up with this. She does like work with trophies and engraving, so she kind of like did some lettering where it says Marvel OverPower Monumental 1996, and on the right side, Game Effects and Card Text by Keith Bursack. And so there were 2 events that were new to Monumental, which was the coming of which was the coming of Galactus and okay, thanks. Which were the coming of Galactus and Secret Wars. So what I tried to do was, especially being familiar with both of those storylines in the comics, try to come up with something to have a little bit of a story go through. Tell something about the event through all 6 of the event cards. So that's why I have those here to sort of be able to tell that. And then the other ones that I picked, just ones that I either like the picture or the card or something like that. And there's obviously some other ones that that work on here. But to me that was really great to be able to not just like say with the bucket of shame where I came up with the name, but to come up with everything that you see on here, the flavor text, the headline, and the game effect. So that was for me probably the highlight of working there was really being able to contribute in a concrete way to the game. And I mean, I don't know, not everybody plays with some of the event cards, but it was an aspect of the game that I really liked with the event cards as well as the the venturing part of it. So and then eventually what happened is that Marvel decided that they really didn't want the OverPower game to go forward, essentially outhouse, meaning that they didn't want Fleer to run the property. So they decided that they were going to bring it back in-house when the licensing came up for renewal. They just decided to not renew it. And then I think DC, I don't remember, again, the timing and everything, but DC may have had one more set go forward and they stopped it as well. And then at that point, they only brought, I believe, Ron to Marvel Comics to run the Marvel Interactive, as well as continue with, I think, a couple of the sets. I know that he worked on the X-Men set. I don't remember. I think the classic had already come out. And at that point, as some of you may remember, I think the X-Men may have been the first set where they strictly went to art that had already been created for comics for the art on the card. Whereas before that, they had, obviously artists create the art for the individual cards. As a side note to that, it was interesting some of the behind the scenes when it comes to either like game effects or card texts. Like, for instance, DC was way more interested in the characters, the specials, and how their characters were portrayed in the OverPower game versus Marvel. Marvel's like, hey, look, just pay us. We really, for the most part, we don't really care what you're doing. I mean, there were a couple that they did care about. Like, for instance, there was the Baron Strucker one per deck for Hydra. The original artist that did it had like several swastikas on there. Like, no, you can't have any of them on there. And there were a couple other ones where people were either like drinking or smoking that they had to remove that. But Marvel didn't care as much. But like, for instance, when it came to the, I think it was the classic set, they had the Black Panther character, and in his specials, and that both neither Steve nor Ron were that familiar with the character, so they really didn't know. They tried to make things related to the comics when it comes to the specials and things like that. And so a friend of mine that happened to be a huge Black Panther fan, worked with me to come up with some of the specials. And I can tell you that there was initially a little pushback with the one special called Heart-Shaped Herb. And I guess that they made me a little nervous because, Black Panther being a black man and, it had herb in there and they were a little worried. But when I was able to show them, hey, look, here's the comic where it's, it's based in a comic. It's not just, trying to be cute or anything like that. It's like, okay, it's in the comic, so it's in the set. So that was kind of fun to do that as well. Let's see. Oh, but then, Ron went to Marvel. At that point, I think I was not that far from graduating from law school. So, I kind of, went on and did my thing. Ron went up to Marvel. Steve, I'm not sure what he went into after that. He and I, lost touch at some point. But what ended up happening was probably maybe like about a year and a half or so later, I had graduated from law school. I didn't pass the bar the first time. So I decided what I wanted to do was try to put a little effort in, maybe pursuing like a comic book career. And at Marvel, they'll let you be an intern, but they wouldn't let you just essentially come and volunteer there. Because I guess they figured, look, we don't just want people off the street. So even though I had already graduated from law school and graduated from college, I went back to the college and said, look, I'm going to sign up for took one of the professors that I was pretty close with and said, look, I'm signing up for an internship class, but I'm never doing anything for this. I'm going to pay for it, but, I already graduated, so the grade doesn't mean anything, but that's just what I needed to get my foot in the door. And, like, okay, yeah, that's, the woman, I think her name was Dr. Tony Libro, she was fine with that because, she and I were pretty close. So what happened was I started commuting from, I don't know anybody that's familiar with the geography of New Jersey, but I was living in South Jersey in Moorestown, and not Morristown, which is up in North Jersey, but Moorestown, which is like South Jersey. And so it probably took me from driving from Moorestown to Trenton, and then getting a train from Trenton into New York Penn Station, and then walking like, 10, 15, whatever, how many blocks it was to the office. It's probably about 2.5 hours one way for me to get from where I was living to the offices. And so I was working as an assistant editor. The intern, which is below, there's the editors, the assistant editors, and then the interns. And I worked there for about like 6-7 weeks, and I mean, it was okay, but just really not, I was hoping, and it ended up being, get a really big headache with about at least 5 hours of commuting every day, to where I was thinking, I think, I may just end up leaving and then just moving on. But because the legal department was very short-staffed, and when they found out that I, was an actual, had graduated from law school, they kind of scooped me up, and I started doing some work in the legal department. And Ron was working there at that time on the OverPower, and I think that may have helped a little bit, knowing somebody that worked there. And that was a pretty cool experience as well. Interestingly enough, related to OverPower, is walking around the building and going into some of the various vaults where they would store things. I actually was able to read the actual contract and legal agreement that Marvel signed with Wizards of the Coast that basically put an end to OverPower, because they agreed in there that they weren't going to be supporting the OverPower collectible card game anymore. That was one of the conditions. At this point, Marvel was. They had the plan that they've since enacted, where they're like, look, we're going to try to get our characters back. We're going to start, the movies going a certain way. And so, but at this point, they were like deep in bankruptcy and didn't have any kind of leverage to be able to say, push back and say, we want to either keep doing something with the game. So they just caved, and essentially that was the end of OverPower, at least in the form where they were putting expansions out. But so I had some pretty cool stuff happen for me when I was there. Like for instance, the being an attorney, it was Chris Claremont, who was a vice president at that point, got some scripts from David Mack for a Daredevil story arc, and they wanted somebody, an attorney, to be able to review that, to say, hey, look, is what's in there, right, not right, whatever. So I reviewed the scripts for the 6-issue minis, the 6-issue story arc, and ended up actually making a fair amount of recommendations for changes to change things around, because like specifically he had some things proceeding really quickly as far as from a legal perspective, where the Kingpin gets arrested, and then they basically have a trial like a week or two later, and so I had suggested that instead of a trial, they make it like I don't remember off the top of my head, or like a different but specific hearing where where the defendant himself might testify, sort of like a grand jury hearing, even though it was in New York. And so he changed it that way and included some things. I thought that I don't know how many people here are familiar with Daredevil, but I suggested beefing up Foggy Nelson's role in the over the story arc to make him. It was just a generic district attorney that at some point in the story starts going after the Kingpin, a lot of his associates. I said, hey, why don't you just make this Foggy Nelson and kind of help that character grow a little bit as well, which he did. And that resulted in Daredevil number 13. When that got published, I got credit on the credits page as being a legal copy consultant. So again, that was pretty impressive. thought. I was really happy with that. I was like, look, I got a real comic book credit here. And something else was, interestingly enough, when this was around the time before the first Blade movie, because Marvel was involved in some litigation with Marv Wolfman, who had created the Blade character as well as a couple other characters. That it's really sort of started out as a pissing contest because Marvel wanted to have the credits for the comic book creators be at the end of the opening credits, and Marv Wolfman, and I guess whoever the artist was, wanted them at the beginning. And because Marvel wouldn't budge and put the created by at the beginning, Marv Wolfman filed a lawsuit claiming that he had created Blade and some other characters that he had created for Marvel as well, specifically the character Nova, the Human Rocket, that were characters that he had created excuse me, previously during a series of comic books that he wrote in college. So it was pretty interesting because I was dealing with a bunch of lawyers who knew nothing about comics. So, and I'd read I read Nova before that. So, they gave me the comics as well as the comics that he wrote in college. And then I had to go through there and basically, like from a legal perspective, pull out, what are things that made it different. And so I remember the first time sitting down with them and explaining, like, for instance, like with the Nova character in the comics that Wolfman created in college, the character was a superhero. I mean, is anybody here familiar with like the character Nova, his origin? A little bit. He's basically in the Marvel comics. He's a high school kid who's going to high school someday, and then he gets hit by a ray from space, and he ends up getting the superpowers that turn him into Nova. Well, in the comic, he was a superhero that gets hit with some crazy ray from space, and then it gives him additional powers. So as I'm explaining to them, well, this is different in their origin, and I explained it, and they're like, what? I had to basically back up and explain to them, why that made the character different, that he went from being a superhero with powers, different powers, to a regular person that then gets superpowers. And there were some other differences in like the powers the character had and the unit in the outfit and things like that. And I know that they ended up, I think, resolving it. And I guess I sort of hoped in some way that work I did gave them, a little bit more leverage to say, oh, this is a case which we think is defensible because it's not the same character. It's not one that you created, because Marvel's position was that it was work for hire, and his was no, that it was something that I created before that, and so I did not then give up all my rights when I, did the character or some incarnation of a guy used at Marvel. But again, all that was because of essentially the pride of wanting your name at the beginning of the credits, not at the end. And then, it was not long after that, because, as another side note, it was one of the vice presidents, but above Dan Buckley at Marvel, at Fleer, who was their general counsel, was Tuck Hardy. And when I got to Marvel, thinking as the assistant editor and working as an attorney in the legal department, Tuck was their legal counsel. So, I knew him a little bit, which helped get me in there. But so what ended up happening is at some point, Tuck ended up leaving, and then I won't forget his name. I think it was Alan Lipson, who used to be the legal counsel of Remington, the shaving company, and then he came to Marvel and wanted to kind of bring some of his people along. So myself and a couple other people just ended up getting kicked out, and that was the end of my time at Marvel. But it was definitely a great experience there. It was good because I would answer questions related to the either editors, assistant editors, or writers would have. Like for instance, they wanted to use in one X-Force comic. Like the characters were at a drive-in, and they wanted to be able to have an image from, I think it was like a Jimmy Stewart movie from like the 30s or 40s, and their question was like, how blurry do we have to make the image so we don't have to pay anybody to use the image, that kind of thing. So I answered those kinds of questions. I handled filing a lot of the copyright registrations. Did you have a question?
Yeah, going back to the when you talked about the contract that Marvel made with the Wizards of the West Coast, that basically said they wouldn't go in competition with Magic, if I remember correctly.
No, it wasn't Magic. It was the whatever the card game was that Wizards of the Coast was getting ready, the superhero card game that they were getting ready to put out. I think it was Versus, but I'm not.
Versus.
Yeah,
it was their X-Men.
X-Men TCG.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one it was, but whichever one it was, and that was going to be Wizards of the Coast's real first foray into the superhero, card game genre.
So that contract is it still applicable today?
Honestly, it's been so long that I read it. I honestly don't remember if there were expiration time frames. Probably. This was probably a contract that was signed in
99.
Yeah, I was there in '99. It predated that, so it might have been end of '98. But yeah, that time frame. Yeah.
And I have another question for you.
Sure.
Are you responsible for the artwork on some of the OverPower cards?
No, if I could draw, I never would have gone to law school or anything like that. So I don't do anything drawing like that. It was just some of the text, game effects or things like that I came up with. I guess sort of on that, I really don't have anything more as far as I don't think any stories that I would want to tell someone that would bother being recorded. But so I'll open the floor if there's any questions about anything.
Well, that was great, Keith.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? We're just going to pass this mic around, and feel free to answer, or he'll answer for you, I suppose. All right, I got a question. My cousin's asked 100 times. You got any information on the production numbers? Because I think that we could, get the whole way to the moon on original OverPower cards.
Yeah.
And image OverPower cards might not all fit in this room. So.
Right. No, unfortunately, I really don't. I wasn't really involved in the production aspects, especially because I wasn't an employee of Fleer, so I didn't really have access to, the production numbers. Occasionally I would hear them, but nothing that ever sunk in.
Right.
I think everybody wants to know What was the mindset in going into creating the Devour Worlds?
It was just the way. I mean, a lot of things. Again, part of it was because there wasn't really a ton of play testing, and that there were a lot of things where the pendulum was swinging a little far one way or the other. And I think it was just more a reaction to the battle sites and how powerful they could become as a way to just kind of reel them in a little bit. So I think that was more the reason behind that.
Without the play testing.
Yeah, because originally when the game first came out, and with the teamwork cards, you didn't have to have any follow-up attacks, which is one of the reasons. And again, I'm not saying this to say anything bad about Frank Yu, but when he won, he would have a deck that was like 60% teamwork, because at that point you didn't have to make a follow-up attack. So if you're throwing out 6 attacks left and right, there's only so many times you can block that. With either an avoid or 6, or 7, or an 8 before you're just gonna be taking those hits. So that's why they ended up then changing it to where you had to have a follow-up attack.
Frank, you and I came up with that rule in Philadelphia.
Yeah, it was definitely a good rule.
John's got a question.
A lot of questions, but in the interest of time, Keith, I don't know how up to date you are with what the group here has done. The Jack and Dan and Sean and Mike and Gary and some of the Canadians in general have really taken OverPower that next step from the last sets that were created back in 1999. And you're probably familiar, I would think, with the Marvels, which was supposed to be printed and distributed and just we ran out of time, so to speak. Can you go a step farther than that? I've heard, and I know these guys could probably tell more about Ultimate Evil. What would have been after that? Was there talk of creating more like a second Image set or another DC set? What can you tell us about what was coming that no one really would have heard about?
I mean, I don't really have a lot of details. I mean, I know that they were certainly considering another Image set, that they were doing some early work on the next DC set. Other than that, not really much more. I mean, I didn't have any specifics as far as like characters or if it was going to be a big set, small set, anything like that. They were, especially because at that point, I wasn't working directly on the game anymore. I wasn't at Marvel, so really my source of information, dried up significantly.
And one other question with regard to the printing. I think I asked this earlier, but the process that they went through to print the cards, was it done with printing plates, or was it done more so like like a Xerox machine that kind of? No, it kind of changed. I believe earlier on that there were printing plates, and then later on it changed, especially when they started doing more just clip art, to just all on a computer. At that point, I believe it was Ron that was doing everything, coming up with the cards, writing them, coming up with the clip art. So they didn't really, it sped things up quite a bit because it wasn't, okay, here's an artist, we need a sketch, okay, we approve that, and then we see the almost final and then make corrections. So there, all those middle steps were just, squished out.
Did they go more to the clip art? Did they go more to the clip art to save costs on?
Yeah, it ended up being a lot cheaper, especially because they were Marvel, using Marvel clip art. So they essentially, didn't have, most of the artists, it was work for hire, so that they didn't have to necessarily give them any royalties because they reused the artwork. So it was a huge cost saving move for the game, as well as everybody realizes the change in the card stock was a lot different for especially the X-Men set. I mean, it would fluctuate some set to set depending on what kind of paper that they would use, but there was certainly a big drop off by the time the X-Men cards, at least in my opinion, came out.
So what really led to the demise of OverPower? Was it?
I think that they were just looking more to try to get things that were going to generate revenue with just minimal or no overhead costs on their behalf. So to have Wizards of the Coast come in, that obviously was looking to do something on a bigger scale, and they felt like it made more sense for them to do that than to have one person essentially working on the game in house, even though it didn't really necessarily cost them that much because Ron was doing other things as well. I guess they just figured, look, it's it's better, might get the Marvel product after we have it in somebody else's hands. I mean, obviously Wizards of the Coast was a proven commodity by that point. That Magic was, that was still, they were still, increasing in their heyday at that point. The sky was still nowhere near the limit for them. I think that they felt it was better for them to, have basically Wizards of the Coast take over all the servicing and, things and tournaments and things like that versus doing it in house. Question.
Which set did Marvel think was like the best set they produced the most? Maybe even which set gave them the most revenue and stuff, and which ones were the worst sets for them that they did? Did it really go down?
When you say Marvel, do you mean like Marvel itself in terms of the profits, or do you mean like Fleer and the creative team?
Actually, both questions interesting.
Well, I was saying with the creative team that my impression was that they were probably the happiest with the Power Surge, IQ and Monumental, kind of that range, I think, when they felt like they were hitting their stride with the game. I mean, Power Surge, obviously, because it introduced a bunch of new characters, all the existing characters, most of them tended to get one really good, at least one really good special out of that. With the IQ, and then changing to the the 4-row character card, not the 3, that was really good. It just opened up a lot more possibilities. And then the Monumental, where they've introduced the the mechanic of the battle sites, just really opened things up a lot more. I mean, I think after that, some of the mechanics were a little more interesting. I wasn't really that big a fan of like the tactic cards, the double shot cards. But again, a lot of that for me was from more of a player's perspective that I just didn't find it to be that interesting or that effective. But it was still an interesting way to try to keep the game moving and evolving and creating new mechanics. But as far as a sales perspective, I think that it may have been Monumental that was one of the bigger sellers. I mean, obviously Image was, because they came in really late. That was the first non-Marvel DC set, that expansion that they came out with. That did pretty well. There was a lot of promotion for that. I mean, this was back when Image was pretty close to its height.
And maybe just a follow-up question. I found the DC cards to be like one of the nicest looking cards in the entire set. Nice quality, good pictures, good story, everything, but they were obviously a little underpowered. Was that something that Marvel kind of regretted?
I don't think so. I think that was more. I think a lot of that came for. I mean, that at that point it was the people that did the comic book art that did the art for the OverPower cards, whereas most of the people who did the OverPower art for the Marvel sets were just freelance artists or other people, not necessarily people at that point who had done extensive work for Marvel or on monthly books or things like that. And again, another part of it was that, again, DC was very interested in how their characters were portrayed. They wanted a lot more input in the characters. I think they wanted, like, for instance, like Superman, who I think is like 7'5", 7'4", which makes him a very expensive character to use, because he's 23 points or something. So, but they wanted Superman and Batman to be, some of the higher point figures to kind of represent how important they felt, because they didn't really understand the game and realized that, hey, look, the character might be more usable and more popular if some of the specials are better. I mean, they were happier with because a lot of those characters tend to have more avoid specific things, not just avoid an attack or avoid attack with a certain type of icon, but avoid a fighting attack, avoid an energy or intellect attack, something like that. So they weren't necessarily as interested in the characters maybe being as competitive with the Marvel characters.
When the X-Men set came out, I had pre-ordered a lot. A lot. I was doing AOL orders at the time. It was even before I got involved with Facebook. And so I pre-ordered. I was doing auctions on AOL, and I actually got shut down by AOL one time for being a scammer because my OverPower mailing list went over 300 people that I was sending out to, and I had to get that reinstated. And I don't remember who, but when I first got the X-Men cards, they came. I got a phone call from somebody at Marvel saying, and I guess I was one of the first shipments, and they said the cards are oversized. We want them back. And I said, that's not happening. and they said, but they're too big. They don't merge. I said, everybody will just have to use sleeves. And it was even before the day the sleeves were real popular. But I just wanted to know if you remember anything about the X-Men cards being bigger, and that was an issue or a concern when they were produced.
Well, it's all Larry's fault.
I had done over $2,000 orders.
That's fair, yeah.
I guess what I would say is I don't know that they particularly noticed. I mean, I think between the changes to card stock, I don't know that they necessarily caught, because again, there was less people working in the game. Like, for instance, when the earlier days, it wasn't just Steve and Ron that were working in the game. There were some other Fleer people that traditionally had worked more on either baseball cards or some of the other like trading card things, like the QFX set or the Marvel vs. Wildstorm card set. So they were more involved in the production aspects of things, making sure that the cards were properly printed and cut the right way, that the collation worked, was as it was supposed to be. So I think the fact that there was more people involved in the production led to the quality being higher. And then later on, when it came to the X-Men set, being that it may have been Ron, and he may have had like an assistant, it just, I guess he, just didn't realize that, hey, they ended up being a little bit bigger. I mean, I think there was a problem with the X-Men cards where some of them were cut to where they were a little wavy on, some of the corners or outsides.
I think it was Ron that called, but I can't be positive. It was too long ago.
Right.
Yes. Is there any reason why the DC cards had different backs?
Even in the Marvel one?
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't imagine DC would want to put out a game that's going to have Spider-Man and X-Men on the back.
That's why we decided to use the black backs. That's why we decided to use the black backs for when we did the Marvels.
That's been, that's kind of
I think it was an afterthought.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, there wasn't really any way, because it was obviously two separate companies that came to Fleer as, the neutral party that I think, because if it was Marvel that was producing OverPower from the beginning, there probably never would have been a DC. And maybe not even an Image. There's the fact that it was a third party that did it, that was able to go and get the independent licenses that let them, do both. And obviously, DC isn't going to have, no way they would have anything Marvel related on their cards. And that's, it was at that point that people needed to start, using either, card sleeves or things like that to, not make it clear what set any particular card's coming up for.
In one of the Legion newsletters, it says the DC Hall of Heroes and the Assault on Onslaught missions were to be reprinted, but with regular card stock and not the straight edge, or for the missions they'll have non-holographic ones. Whatever happened to that?
I know.
If anything, if you.
I don't. I actually called Marvel and said, hey, what's going on with it? Because it was listed in the checklist that there was regular cardstock in the Infamous Gary Martin Jr. List. And they said that when they reprinted them, instead of doing it on the regular cardstock, they reprinted them as holos and they reprinted them as the original glossies. And so they made a mistake at the printers. And then when they sent them the bill and it was this high instead of this high, they said, no, we ordered this and this is all we're going to pay. And that's how we got those cards and got more of the original style.
All right. The other question was for Image. Why was the push for Japan heavy? All the rule books for Image were Japanese.
Yeah, it was just at that point they'd had, OverPower had I think more overseas success than they had anticipated. So it was just another new market that they were trying to get into. They figured that Image with some of the more like manga type influenced art, like Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, some of those artists. I think they felt that the artwork might play a little bit better than the more Americanized artwork related to the Marvel and the regular Marvel and DC stuff. So just trying to grow the brand, keep it growing, new marketplaces.
And is there anything? Is there any Image rulebook that's in English? Just, I think Bill and I were talking about this. Are there? Does it exist or just?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay. You might want to go to the center.
How involved were you in setting power grids?
For some of the sets, I had some input related to the classic and a little bit with the X-Men, but the ones before that, not really.
Oh, okay. Because you had said that DC wanted to be directly involved in like setting Batman and Superman's grid, and I've always wondered why Professor X has two fighting. Was that Marvel coming in and saying we can't give him one fighting?
No, I mean Marvel didn't they didn't really care. They just wanted to get the money for the use of the characters. So they really wanted aside from making sure there wasn't things like either swastikas or drinking or smoking on the cards. Other than that, they really didn't have much care the way the the characters were set. I think that was probably just more just to try to keep things balanced. I mean, there were some characters that they wanted to be more lower cost than other ones. I mean, some of the characters, while maybe somewhat accurate, the costs end up being prohibitively high to be able to use the character on a team. If it's 22, 23, 24 points, that means you then have to have a lower point character to kind of balance it out.
So was kind of DC's involvement in setting their own power grids kind of?
No, they didn't want the power grid set, but they when they sent them the proposed power grids, then that's when they started doing some light to medium interfering as far as, well, no, we want to make sure that this character is kind of here in relation to some of the other characters. I mean, like for instance with Superman, they were fine with him being the dual 7s, and then for instance Doomsday being an 8 strength, so that even though he was stronger, Superman had other things that he was better in.
Okay.
So I wanted to get your thoughts on what the thought process was for the number of cards that went into the expansion sets like DC and Image, because I feel like one of the barriers to adopting those sets was that you're being competitive. The older Marvel characters had so many more specials to diversify their deck. Both they had more power, so that's why I talk about the newer characters being underpowered, but also they said a greater number of specials. So if you're trying to have a deck that doesn't duplicate, you have more diversity. A lot of Marvel heroes might have 8 or 9 individual specials. DC comes out with a set where you're starting at 6, and I felt like they're always just that step behind. So I just wanted to know if you know anything about the thought process with, was it to make sure that the DC set didn't suddenly take over or get over adopted early on, or was it just that was the amount of work or kind of that's the amount that you could get done for one set, or was there any thought process to that?
I think the thought process was that they wanted the characters to be able to progress over the sets, and that after like the first Marvel set where each character got 5 specials, and then like one more of the original ones in Power Surge, that for the later sets the characters came out with 6 specials, and then the thought process was in the next set, they would get another special. And then same thing with DC, the first set they're going to have X, and then one more, 1 or 2 more in the second expansion, and then 1 or 2 more in the subsequent expansions. To where eventually things would even out. I mean, Marvel would be ahead because I think it was 3 or 4 Marvel sets, maybe more, before the first DC one came out. So unless DC wanted to do a massive initial release, they were always going to be behind the curve.
Keith, who was responsible for introducing Intellect?
I mean, I think you mean like who specifically,
or just like, at what point did someone say, "Oh, wow, we need to add another statistic," and because we got characters that really are more, fine?
Yeah, it was more of a way because, for instance, there's in the original before OverPower came out, when they were developing the game, the characters had 4 power grids, 4 different areas that they got rated in. And then I think that they felt that there were just some characters under the 3 power system that just, you really weren't able to kind of encompass what you would need to. I mean, for instance, like Mr. Fantastic, Dr. Doom, of course, you can see he'd be big in a lot of areas, but Mr. Fantastic, not really strong, not really a fighter, not really energy. So, they really needed something, a stat that would really kind of encompass, somebody like Mr. Fantastic, a way to really, show him, an intellect was really the way to do that. And I think that they felt it would just increase the overall diversity of the game to have 4 different, statistics. Because then when it came to things like universe cards and teamwork cards, it wasn't just always the same 3. You could have only 3 out of the 4, and then just kind of create more, a better way to customize it. So for instance, if you want to have a deck that only focused on 2 with just 1 as like a tertiary skill, and then not include any of a 4th one, you could sort of have like an anti-strength deck by not having your team have really anybody that had any strength-based power cards or things like that. Because obviously there's some event cards that specifically prevent specific like cards with say specific either power types or things like that from getting played. So it was just a way to kind of increase the diversity and the pool of cards and the way the game played.
All right, I'm going to ask one question after this gentleman, and then I think we're going to wrap it up unless anybody has anything super pressing, so we can get to this draft.
And I'm going to be around, tomorrow, so certainly feel free to come and ask any questions.
Okay, quickly, besides the ones that were already mentioned, like Vertigo and the Guest of Our Own, were there any cards maybe that were regretted maybe right after they were released that you thought you were going to be really good and no one used them, or that you thought were very good and they were just way overpowered?
I would say that the second part, not at all, when it came to cards that just maybe weren't as good, because I think Ron and Steve felt that they weren't, unlike Marvel or unlike Magic, it wasn't always about coming out with every card that could potentially be game breaking or game altering with either whatever combination. So they were certainly less concerned with everybody having really exceptional special cards or inherent abilities or things like that. But as far as things that they felt were kind of maybe after the fact a little broken, I mean aside from the ones that we already talked about. Yeah, I mean, some of the negates that they wanted to avoid. That's why it tended to shift later to either like negating specific types of cards, or that you could only negate something played against that specific character. To try to, they felt that if things just ended up being to where if everybody had to have it in their deck, then that wasn't a good thing. It wasn't okay. We're going to have everybody's deck is going to be 70% the same and only 30% different. They wanted different cards and different combinations that might make different deck options. So you wouldn't always see, okay, this would just be all the decks are going to be, all the people that come to a tournament are going to be playing different variations of strength decks. So that would make either a specific type or combinations more viable by having different cards that would play together in different ways. I remember that there when it came to, I think it made the Falcon like Power Dive card, he may have been one of the first people as a way to get rid of cards that had continuing effects, a way to a card that got rid of anything that gave basically that created a continuing effect. So that they eventually, as they saw things were getting a little out of hand, try to come up with a counter to either give a counter to people or just make it so prevalent that you could kind of have the same sort of effect but different ways. So you wouldn't say you always have to have this particular character if you wanted to do a specific game combination.
All right, my question is sort of for the whole room. On the Gary Martin Jr. list of collectibles and things that actually are supposed to exist, these 17-card packs are supposed to come in a box, possibly. These were only sold at Walmart, I believe, or maybe Walmart and a few other stores. And I was wondering if you or anyone else has ever seen the box, or if they were actually shipped in the blue boxes, or just in a big old bin or something.
I've never seen the boxes.
No idea. Anybody?
I've never seen the box. We have thousands.
Yes. These are prevalent.
Yeah, just one last thing if I can, which is I brought some stuff that I wanted to be able to kick into the prize pool for tomorrow.
Any part of teamwork?
No, unfortunately, I don't even have any more of them. But let's see.
Keith gave me a Chrome set earlier that's going to the prize pool.
Yep.
He also donated $100 towards the packs, so there will be a $100 pack store credit in the prize pool tomorrow as an option for somebody. Keith is very much hoping to leave with the Deathlock art somehow, even if he does not win it himself.
Yeah, correct.
So if anyone wants to trade him, it gets it.
Yes, I mean I got some stuff I'm donating to the prize pools, and then some things which I'll briefly tell everybody since I'm thinking to sit up here and do that. As far as some stuff which if anybody gets the Deathlock card, again that's from one of the event cards from the Monumental set. And I wrote, so definitely like to get that either by trading or buying it off somebody. Possibly even a sheet as well. But the things that I'm donating are there's a complete set of the Chromium cards, all 8 of them. There are 2. I know that Phil said that he has some, as far as the 2 Captain Universe cards.
Yeah, we have other Chrome heroes. We're gonna add the Captain Universe cards.
Smaller lots, not all 8, but like 1 or 2 to put it there. Everybody that's actually in the tournament tomorrow, I'm going to give a blank OverPower card, where it's got blank on one side and OverPower on the back.
So those were printed back. They're actually copyrighted in 1995. So these were originally used to play test the game, and they would just write on the front of the card. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they're around, but they're fairly rare. Most people don't have them.
And does anybody know where Marcel got those cards that are black?
Oh, those playtest card things. Those were earlier, and Keith showed me some other ones that he had brought along that I could show you. But yeah, there was sort of like an evolution of different playtesting stages that we were hoping to, with the stuff he got and what some of Marcel's got, we were hoping to maybe in a future year present as like an evolution of the game. We're not quite there yet, but yeah, that's sort of. There were a number of different stages of like quality of playtest cards and thicknesses and different things. Yeah. So
another thing that I'm going to be donating is this is a for those of you that haven't seen it, this is like one of the boxes to be able to put your decks in. This was actually one that was Stephen Domzalski's son that he had it because you can kind of see like etched in there. It says Stephen. I guess his son was playing the game for a while, but then just lost interest. So instead of just throwing his out, he brought it in, asked me if I wanted it. There's also a couple little extra things in here. Minor things, nothing earth shattering. I mean, unless you really, really want the box, this certainly wouldn't be what you would pick if you win the whole thing tomorrow. There's nothing, not that exciting inside. A couple little things, but nothing, earth shattering. That's it for the stuff in the tournament. Some other things that I have again that I'd like to either use to trade to get the Deathlock artwork. Is one of the things that I also got when I was at Marvel is the whole Wildstorm set of cards. This is the shrunk wrap. It's the entire. I'm not sure how many cards are in the set. I think it's like 49 in the base set, and then there's a whole. I mean, this might be like. I'm not even sure how many, but basically all the chase cards associated with the set as well. And as you can see, it does include a complete set of all the chromium cards. I mean, I would probably estimate this might be worth like $100, $150. I mean, if you go onto eBay, you can look up Wildstorm Marvel versus Wildstorm. I think the base set may sell for like 40 to 60. I don't think anybody's sold for quite a long time the whole thing like this.
Yeah, these are pretty rare because same thing happened with Hollow series. That you could in theory buy a sealed pack. I believe Jack stumbled upon something. I don't know if it was sealed. And my cousin bought one on eBay that actually had the Hollow Heroes in the back, except for the Catwoman. Yours wasn't sealed, but it came with all the blue and all the.
I just got one.
It would be pretty unrealistic. Yeah. So yours was one of those also, probably, but just open.
No.
But typically, these are not like available for purchase to the general public. They're either for somebody who was in some way working for the game. So that's what makes the sealed sets fairly rare.
Yeah, because they would often print these, and I mean, if you're an artist, aside from you would usually get one whole set of these, and your card would be in there. I mean, again, most of the people that worked in the offices tended to get one of these. I mean, some of the people that worked there would have like boxes this big with all kinds of different things like this stuck in there. So there's this, and this is also this is a whole thing filled with classic cards, where it's a lot of the character cards plus all the specials that are associated with it. I mean, I know that there's not the Baron Mordo character card, the Heroes for Hire character card, or the Heroes for Hire Iron Fist card in here. But other than that, I believe there are.
Who knows why that?
But honestly, those were some of the hardest ones to get. As everybody who's played trying to collect it knows. So this was like a lot of the leftover cards from trying. Because the other thing that I did, which was really cool, was when the sets would come out, they would have me and then this other friend of mine that I took on that. Exhibit thing that I went to as well, we would put together complete sets. They would basically give me like sleeves of the cards, say, hey, put together 10, 20, 30, however many complete sets of all the cards from the set. And these were like a bunch of the leftovers, but it's not just one of each. There's like multiples of a lot of the cards in there. So like for instance, like Absorbing Man, there's it's like this thick with several character cards, several each of some of the one per decks and other cards. So people are certainly welcome to take a look through there. Be willing to either sell or trade a lot of these for some of those type things.
So Keith would like the art. But let's give Keith a round of applause. That was quite an honor. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. And again, thank everybody for. I mean, here it is. 16, 17 years later, the game hasn't even been put out, and still going pretty strong. A lot of people still playing. With a pretty good frequency, and I'm really glad to have been a part of that, both for as a player and then having worked on the game. It's certainly could have done it without such a dedicated fan base.
How about the Marvel?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everybody in this room was definitely part of it, including Larry, who kept the store going when all of us weren't even really thinking about the game too much anymore. So, yeah, guys. So I think we're going to do the draft or take like a 5 or 10 minute break, and then we'll set up some drafts. So stretch your legs, and we will continue.